How to Fix It. This year is Star Trek's 50th anniversary, and I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I really like Star Trek. If you didn't, that means that you haven't seen 12% of my videos. Star Trek the Motion Picture is not a good movie. That's something everyone, even non-Trek fans, know. It's slow, the plot is confusing, and frankly, the entire movie is a mess. William Shatner in Leonard, his book about the late Leonard Nimoy, gave an entire chapter dedicated to their experiences working on the movie, saying that the thing didn't even have a finished script or an ending in mind when filming began. That, compiled with the fact that the movie is more interested in the special effects than the nearly non-existent story, the movie was doomed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If I keep going, I won't have any flaws to talk about in the what didn't work section. Oh, and why look at this and not Star Trek V? Well, after watching both of them during my first watch-through of Star Trek years ago, the only movie I had a desire to watch again was this one. And I know I don't normally dress up for How to Fix It, but since I'm losing out on a whole month for Star Trek with Classic Novel Month, and I want to get the most out of this costume this year, I'm gonna wear it whenever I talk about Star Trek. Anyway, let's boldly go where every internet reviewer has gone before, and check out Star Trek the Motion Picture. The movie is about former Captain, now Rear Admiral, James T. Kirk, played by William Shatner, who is returning to the Enterprise after it's been refit in order to stop a big energy entity that is heading towards Earth and has already wiped out a Klingon vessel. He's taking command from the new captain, Willard Decker, played by Stephen Collins, who is implied to be the son of Commodore Matt Decker from the Doomsday Machine. Not a good start, considering the last Trek material I looked at that channeled the Doomsday Machine was before Dishonor. Decker is angry about the demotion, but it's a Starfleet order because Kirk is naturally their best asset against things.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
Wait a minute, McCoy, you don't show up until later. Wait your turn. Kirk gets the band back together. Scotty, played by James Doohan, Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols, Chekhov, played by Walter Koenig, Sulu, played by Droox Takei, and even Janice Rand, played by Grace Lee Whitney. The only problem is getting a science officer to replace Spock, who is off undergoing the Kolinar ritual to remove all his emotions, although that hasn't quite panned out, since whatever the energy entity is doing, Spock can sense it and it's interfering with the test. The officer Kirk picked, Commander Sonak, is the unfortunate victim of a transporter accident, and instead of being split in half or being sent to the mirror universe, he just ends up as a pile of dead. There's also another problem. McCoy doesn't want to beam up to the ship. Justifiably so, since the last guy to do that died, but they force him through anyway, and he beams up, ready to take his old post. A new officer has also joined the crew, Lieutenant Ilea, a Deltan who knows Captain Decker, as he was posted on her planet for a while. And if that sounds familiar, that's because their relationship was later recycled for Will Riker and Deanna Troi on Star Trek The Next Generation. Kirk calls a briefing and shows the crew what they're up against and prepares to head out to stop the energy entity. They get stuck in a wormhole created by an energy imbalance and are about to hit an asteroid, and Kirk orders phasers, but Decker countermands him and orders photon torpedoes. Kirk is annoyed, but Decker explains to him that the refit made it so phasers are channeled through the engines, so they would have been useless. McCoy also confronts Kirk and tells him that he's obsessed with keeping the Enterprise. Uhura informs Kirk that a Starfleet shuttle is coming to deliver a new crew member, and they rendezvous, and the crew member turns out to be none other than Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy. Spock helps rebalance the engines, getting them back to full capacity, and they locate the entity and attempt to make contact with it. The entity attacks the ship since it's trying to communicate with it, but at such a rate that the Enterprise can't respond. Spock wants to go inside the entity, but Decker is against it. They start moving closer, and the entity sends a probe aboard that kills Lieutenant Ilea. They get caught in a tractor beam and another intruder enters the ship, a mechanized probe that has the image of Lieutenant Ilea. She tells them that she works for V'ger, the entity, and that V'ger is looking for the creator. She calls everyone Unit, Kirk Unit, Carbon Unit, except for Decker. They realize that means that Ilea might still have her memories, so they send Decker to try to get her to remember who she is. Spock decides to go with his plan and fly into it, and so he flies out in an EV suit and ends up performing a mind meld with V'ger, flying into that scene from the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. After he returns to the ship, Spock explains that V'ger came from a race of living machines that sent him out with immense technology and knowledge, but no concept of feelings, like a child. V'ger starts broadcasting a radio signal, and since the creator hasn't responded, it's going to get rid of all the carbon units infesting its creator's planet. Kirk tells the Ilea probe that he knows why the creator hasn't responded, but won't tell V'ger unless he stops attacking the carbon units. V'ger stops, and Kirk plans to fly the Enterprise into V'ger's center and self-destruct, hopefully taking V'ger out with them. They get there, and Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Decker, and the Ilea probe go out, discovering that V'ger is actually Voyager 6, an Earth probe that was lost in a black hole and was consequently discovered by the machine race, who upgraded it and took its programming to search for knowledge literally, and gave it the ability to do so. They realize that V'ger is looking for an old NASA command code and get it, but V'ger demands that he join with the creator, and so Decker, telling Kirk that he wants this as much as Kirk wants the Enterprise, finishes the code, joining with V'ger, causing V'ger to explode and Decker and Ilea to possibly become the next step in evolution. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy return to the Enterprise, and Starfleet asks for the casualty reports, and Kirk lists only two, Decker and Ilea, who aren't killed, but rather missing. Scotty informs Kirk that the Enterprise is ready for a proper shakedown, and Kirk orders the ship to boldly go in search of a better movie. We'll be right back. I am a huge nerd. And we're back. I might have a problem. The story isn't bad. It's an interesting story. The probe from Earth getting upgraded by a civilization that takes its mission literally is interesting, especially if you subscribe to the theory that the people who upgraded V'ger were the Borg. Decker is interesting, especially since he's implied to be Matt Decker's son, so he not only has Kirk take the Enterprise, but Kirk is also one of the last people who had ever seen his father alive before the Doomsday Machine killed him. And his relationship with Ilea probably would have been at least decent if they had time to develop it aside from just referencing it when Ilea came onto the bridge, like Riker and Troy's developed over the 7 seasons of The Next Generation. Also, the new ship design is great. Admittedly, at first when I saw this movie, I absolutely hated the rectangular nacelles of the movie-era Constitution class, but I've come to appreciate it. The interiors are good too. It's sort of a logical progression from the TOS interiors that eventually evolves into what we get in Wrath of Khan onwards. Plus, the effects in the movie look amazing. Probably because the movie pays more attention to the effects than the characters, but the visuals are stunning for the time. Also, while it's a bad movie, it did well enough to warrant a sequel, which is my favorite Star Trek movie of all time, so it has that going for it. Also, the music is great. Jerry Goldsmith does a great job with the score, even though I am kind of biased since the theme music for the movie later went on to serve as the theme for The Next Generation. The music in Star Trek films are always important, and that trend of awesome soundtracks started with this movie. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the actors, who all give in great performances. Obviously, the original cast give the best performances, but the stuff we get from Persis Khambatta and Stephen Collins are fine performances. They just can't stack up with the pros. The story is good, it's just... It's more like the plot to an hour-long Star Trek episode than it is a movie. Star Trek the Motion Picture is the longest of all the movies, and the least stuff happens in it. Most of the movie is padded with shots of the ship, or the weird prologue from one of the DVDs. That's probably because of the aforementioned not having an ending when they started caused a lot of need for padding. The movie is confusing too. I remember the first time I watched it, I had no idea what was going on, especially during the wormhole scene and any time they interacted with V'ger. The effects are just so overpowering that I can't discern what the plot is. The costumes look terrible too. Listen, I love the TOS costumes, and these are just terrible. It's like the Season 1 Next Generation costumes. They have their good parts, but for the most part are terrible. The colors are gross. The brown beige that Chekhov gets is almost as bad as whatever he's wearing in Star Trek 3. And while the uniforms that Kirk and Spock wear aren't bad, the best is probably McCoy's, the medical lab coat one, not the Disco Grizzly Adams one. The jumpsuits are horrendous, and I am extremely happy that the uniforms were changed for the following movie. They're just so goddamn 70s that Commander Lewis from The Martian would say that they need to tone it down a little bit. Also, the movie lacks heart. Shatner mentioned that in his memoir, and that he and Leonard Nimoy endeavored to add a human touch to it. The problem is that it's more interested in the effects than the characters, and that's not what Star Trek is about. Star Trek is a character-driven show, and so, without giving them center seat, you get a hollow shell of a movie. On that note, there is not enough development to care about what happens to Ilea and Decker. Unlike in the original Pix, which was for a TV show that presumably would have had them as main characters, and so had that happened in the season finale or something, her death and Decker's would have meant something, as opposed to being deaths of characters that were holding us back from who we really turned on the movie to see. Also, isn't the plot of the movie kinda similar to the Changeling episode of TOS, with V'ger being swapped out for Nomad? I mean, there are obvious differences, with the ending being different, but the whole destroying humanity because they're impeding its mission sounds kinda familiar. It just kinda feels like the movie is trying way too hard to be 2001: A Space Odyssey, when Star Trek isn't anything like that movie at all. Honestly, this would work better as a television show. The movie starts out rushing a bunch of storylines together. The Kirk taking back the Enterprise storyline, which could have been its own episode. The replacing Spock storyline. The Decker-Ilea storyline. Then the V'ger storyline. That's like half a season of episodes, especially if they took the time to develop the characters properly. Also, change the uniforms. Personally, I'd have stuck with the original TOS uniforms, maybe updating them a bit, and based on publicity photos, that was the original plan for Phase 2. I guess they might not have looked good on a movie set, but they obviously had money to redesign the uniforms completely, so why not use a design that they probably already had lying around? Plus, if I was keeping it as a movie, it would be way shorter. Obviously, I'd pare down the panning shots and I'd lessen the reliance on effects. Star Trek got itself to cult status with the cheapest looking effects, and that's why it relied on its characters. So, if we still have those characters, we don't need to lean on the effects to pad the movie, so the plot would have also made a lot more sense. I'd have also given the movie more humanity. I mean, it had some with the whole V'ger leading Spock back to emotion, but other than that, it's very flat. All in all, the movie's real problem isn't the concept, but rather the execution. And had the movie been done even a tiny bit differently, it might not have the reputation that it has today.
Star Trek, the motion picture.
And that was Star Trek the Motion Picture. Is it really as bad as everyone says it is? Oh yeah, it definitely is, but it could have been saved if only a few things were changed. Through the hectic production, the confusing plot, constant padding, and reliance on special effects, it created a really crappy movie. But, since its relative success gave Paramount the confidence to give the Enterprise one more chance, like NBC had done with The Cage, we got Star Trek II. So unlike another Star Trek movie that relied on effects and had a confusing plot, this one actually led to a good sequel. It's still watchable and an interesting movie with a decent premise, once you figure out what's going on. If you're a Star Trek fan and put off watching this movie like I did at first, give it a chance. You might find that it's at least worth watching once. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of How to Fix It, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time. McCoy also confronts Kirk and tells him that he's obsessed with keeping the. And that was Star Trek the Motion Picture. Is it really as bad as everyone says it is? Oh yeah, it is. But it could have been saved if only a few things were changed. Through the hectic production,